Thank you very much for joining us today for another session of the Computational Social Sciences Research Center CSS online series. It's a great pleasure to welcome our speaker today, Professor Tuba Bircan. I know you know her very well, but let me remind you. And Professor Tuba Bircan is a research professor in the Department of Sociology at Mirage University, Brussels, and the director of the BRISPO Research Group. It used to be known as the Interface Democracy. She holds her bachelor's and master's degree in statistics, as well as a PhD in social and political sciences from the Catholic University Leuven. So her works sits at the interaction of social sciences and data scientists. She's a real computational social scientist, and she brings together rigorous methodological expertise with a very good understanding of major social questions of like migration, inequalities, public perceptions, the governance of big data and AI, and more broadly, she's interested in how data-driven methods can help address complex societal challenges, while also promoting ethical and trustworthy AI. This ethical component is very it's an important area where she's contributing to. And she is an active member of international CSS academic community, serving in many journals, conferences, and she's a known face in our events and Turkey computational social science conferences. And thank you very much, Tuba Hocam, for all of your efforts so far for CSS and for the community back in Turkey. And we are very pleased to have you with us today with your talk titled "Synthetic Data as a Methodological Fix or a Mirage: Partial Observability in Social Systems." Thank you very much for joining us, and I would like to thank all of the audience for being here today. And yeah, floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. Yes, for the very kind words as well. Like you make me bigger than who I am, but I'm super happy to be here, honestly. And it's also exciting for me because I'm going to talk about something that we've started to work relatively recently, because I have been working with various big data types and some AI tools or developing some models, but we've started working on synthetic data, I think 2 years ago. So we are trying to elaborate, and I'll also tell you the story part of it. So how we ended up with looking for solutions within the synthetic data. So I have a very long list of references at the end. I'll share the slides, so I strongly recommend that you have a look at them, but there are several studies on that. So today I will try to talk about the dilemma that we've had rather than what you can do with synthetic data, because I think you can already learn the technique part through different ways. So we do all know that yeah, we are dealing with socio-political economic challenges. So it's been all around and it changes. It could be a migration. Today it's war. The next day, we don't know what's going to happen. 6 years ago, it was the COVID. So shocks happen. A lot of things happen. And sometimes chronologically, sometimes acute. And we try to understand what's really going on, try to come up with some solutions. And as computational scientists or data scientists, or at least, let's say, more quantitative social scientists, we always rely on data. Although all societal problems, or let's say socioeconomic problems, or the solutions towards them start with questions, not with data. I think the best thing about computational social science is that we find a way to align them, because you can start with patterns, what data tells me, or you can start with a question. How can I answer this question with different data methods? I think computational data science somehow merges them and makes it easier. And let's say, I think CSS people are more advantageous to data scientists in this sense. So the idea of synthetic data is reconstructing the social reality. I'm not going to go into epistemic discussions, what is real, what is social, whatever, but in lay terms, when we don't have good data, incomplete data, how we can reconstruct it. That is the initial idea of the synthetic populations, and it has been used in various disciplines. And in our social systems, whatever you can think of, even the best data, even the census data is incomplete, because when we talk about migration flows, attitudes, voting behavior, mobility patterns, online networks, everything is based on what is recorded. So like when you work with social media data, either users or the discourse, you limit yourself with the people who chose to be part of it. When you're talking about census data, you already skip undocumented people or people who are mobile, who are not there. Or about the attitudes of the surveys, we do know that the representativeness is not sufficient for having the big population, but we work with inferences. We'll come back to that. And of course, the incompleteness is not when I say the data is incomplete, the population can be incomplete, the variables can be incomplete, or the time series, the temporality might be really lacking. You're going to see a few cartoons here and there because I think we try to label data easily, because you can have good data, big data, bad data, or you can also have incomplete data, you can have biased data. Whatever we say, you're going to see in many articles that they acknowledge the shortcomings, but they continue. So here we will say what you should do between acknowledging the issues and what you should do to be able to continue, because synthetic data started as a response, as a methodological response to missing observability, as I said, in either the population sample or variables or the time. So today I would like to provoke a few thoughts, if I can, to discuss if synthetic reconstruction improves inference or it merely replaces missing data with model assumptions. And we will repeat this model assumptions and the modalities several times. So we do know that you are becoming, or you are the future CSS experts. It assumes large data sets, because AI in general, or the machine learning, whatever modality you are working with, it's data hungry. So the more the data, the better it is. But sometimes the more data doesn't mean better data. So in large data sets, we assume that the data is so big that we have the complete observability, which is an assumption. But in general, going back to what I said, they are structurally incomplete. And the typology of the synthetic data is very simple. It isn't super technical, I have to say. It is really like we either use it for privacy substitution, like assume that you're working with very sensitive health data. So you cannot work with data because you don't want to identify people. So you replace restricted data with synthetic replicas, and we also do it a lot with mobile phone data, for instance. Or you can use it for population reconstruction. So assume that you have data for some parts or some country, and you want to do it for another county or a region. So you, in a way, impute data for the place where you have no microdata. And the last one is the simulation infrastructure. So because we create artificial populations for agent-based models, we will go in detail there. So the thing you have to remember is that your purpose can be very different, or the typology can be different, but the evaluation questions are different for each of them. And why evaluation is important is, in fact, what makes us to question, is the solution or is the problem? So the technical forms are, we are either talking about statistically synthetic data, ML synthetic data, or synthetic populations. So the Bayesian networks, like copula-based models, these are the statistical synthetic data. But the GANs, variation autoencoders, or diffusion models are usually the ML synthetic data. What we use the most, I have to say, is the synthetic populations, especially for transport modeling. It's been used a lot in the urban studies or epidemiological simulation, like a pandemic. I would like to talk a bit about where you can see it, because we talk about it, but is it like an assessment? Do we really see it happening? Who does it? Is it only academic? No, it is not, because agent-based models and micro simulation systems, we usually use them because there are some cases where we cannot empirically test it in the real population. That's why we usually go for these models or the systems. And we use synthetic populations, especially when we model population level interactions or some policy scenarios. It really happens a lot and it can be super useful, but I think the keyword is when well constructed, because the synthetic populations can give us a population structure. And when I say population, don't think like really a census or a population of a country. It is really your target population who you're interested in. It could be, I don't know, X users. It could be the customers that you are going to target, or it could be even students at a school. But more interestingly, you can also get demographic composition. So when you do know that when we try to couple, like probably you familiar with the digital twins, but we also have non-digital like offline twins, which means when you see a city, I'm sure many of you or as students said, oh, this is the Nevizade of this city, because we try to align things to what we really see familiar. You can also do it with the cities, with populations, and you can say like, oh, the population in this city is very similar to that city, because the demographic composition is one of the keys. And then, of course, the spatial distribution households we could do, because especially in the planning and the policymaking, we use it a lot. And the last is the most challenging one, which is the statistical constraint derived from census data. What we do have is that you may assume that census data has everything, but I think till 2021, latest, I would say we still had census. Census is a really survey, but it has been done to everybody. Somebody knocks your door, comes in and asks you thousands, millions of questions, but we stopped that. And now the census data is becoming more population register data. So the administrative data. And if you remember what type of information is registered with your residence, nothing about your education. So the census data based on population register is, for instance, lacking significantly in the education level. I mean, a few countries are doing very well, like Nordics, Sweden, but even in the Western European countries where you would assume that statistics is super high quality, it is not. So the statistical constraints derived from the census data can also be used through the synthetic population. But I think you were expecting an however or but here. Yes, it is very promising. Yes, you can do a lot, but it is also important to acknowledge what you cannot, or where we have to pay extra attention. Because statistical consistency does not necessarily mean that it gives you the certainty. And I will give you a very concrete example, because it avoids the rare events. So it's really like building a distribution and assuming that the outliers are not they don't matter a lot for your case. So they often rely, synthetic population and data generation often relies on simplified behavioral rules, assumed laser transition probabilities, but also, and I think very, very important, is the statistical relationships imported from other data sets. So when I mean, you can say that, yeah, but if it is rare, maybe it's not that important because we are trying to infer something. But remember, Adam's research is about that as well. We are interested in political unrest. We are interested in a shock, like a migration shock. We are interested in a big conflict. We are interested in a regime change. And these kind of shocks are rare events. So we don't see them. That is one of the reasons that predictive models in general and the forecasting models fail to capture these shocks, because you can remodel them once everything is there, but predicting what's going to happen is not super easy. So the statistical relationships important from other data sets or they tell that everything will happen as they have happened before. So that's why this statistical consistency, statistical validity cannot match what the social reality will be. So I'll give you a few examples, not into much detail, but the epidemiology and public health is where it started. So they started representing households, workplaces, sometimes even social contacts, because they use it a lot to simulate disease transmission. And it was very useful. It started way before COVID, but we used them a lot. Like during the COVID-19, they didn't use it only for the transmission or understanding the epidemic spread, but they also used it for the policy simulation. So they wanted to understand what's going to happen if we have a lockdown, what's going to happen if we have a school closures, or how we should change the vaccination strategy. So these happened very fast, and synthetic populations can really help you to do that, because for a real experiment, you have a very long design. And the second, that the most common usage is in the urban systems and mobility, because we use synthetic household individuals to be able to simulate the commuting behavior. So they really try to understand. And I don't know if you noticed in different countries, I'm not sure if it is in Turkey. It's been a while that I'm not there, but you would see that they do collect data, like on the roads, there's just one wire, so they count the bikes or the pedestrians or the cars, and then they develop a simulation to see like what might be the commuting behavior if they cancel a train, what might be a commuting behavior. Like an example, very recently Belgium had a policy change, so they said that every employer should pay 50% more per kilometer to the employees who want to cycle to the work. And it is purely based on the synthetic population. They really did some calculations, because it is not only about the policy simulation, but also the economic forecasting, like what will be the cost benefit, and especially for the employers. And then we do it for the transport demand, but also urban development scenarios, especially with the, let's say, the building permits, or let's say when they decide where to have a hospital. So we use these urban systems and mobility and synthetic populations a lot, because it is very rich data. Transport models simulate millions, and then they can really simulate. They don't care who per se, but they are more interested in the aggregate level, and they really can go for cities to predict congestion or infrastructure needs and everything. And the third one that was my reason to enter synthetic population is disaster and evacuation modeling, because in one of our projects funded by Belmont Forum, which is called CLIMB, we are trying to combine different data sets, satellite data, mobile phone data, and also some registered data. We are trying to model how people will respond to extreme events or climate change. And so disaster and evacuation modeling is more related to evacuation. I mean, there's the extreme weather events. And as a part of it, so we are focusing on sub-Saharan Africa, but we are working with Doctors Without Borders, where they are very much interested in how our models can help them to optimize where to send volunteers, where to send help and support, and when. So they really would like to understand. And the only way to do is to work with simulations. So the synthetic populations in such cases, they allow us to model how people will react, but sometimes how infrastructures will react to extreme, mostly weather events. But it is also possible to check it for conflict and war conditions, hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, also like floods. We do it a lot. And emergency planners, also civil society and humanitarian aid, they use this a lot. They create synthetic cities. I mean, not per se at the same location. Sometimes they do that. What if we move people from this place to that place? So it is impossible to test with the real population, so we do that. One of the shortcomings here is we can do it. I mean, it works better in areas where you have recurring disasters or extreme weather events. But for instance, the simulations did not work for Spain and Italy. I mean, especially for Spain, I don't know if you remember, last year they had very extreme floods in the Valencia region. So it was for the first time, so it was not very easy to simulate. And then, of course, we do have it also, like the first one was, if you remember, about the social simulation, but I also would like to talk about how synthetic data can be used for AI and machine learning and vice versa, because synthetic data is the inbreeding of AI. So you do know that we mostly train, or so far we have been training AI and the models on the human-generated data, but with the increase in the synthetic data or AI-generated data, now the training models are also relying on this. So there's huge discussion around the this inbreeding of AI, but today I will more talk about how we couple them for the synthetic data generation. So in the healthcare AI, so the medical data sets are either restricted because of privacy or not accessible for other reasons. So what the companies and the ministries and the hospitals do, they create synthetic patients. So these records are used, first generated, then used to train diagnostic algorithms and to test clinical models. So because of the richness of healthcare data, they usually work very well. But still, we do know that the bias in the training data is still persistent. To be very particular, the medicine that is the medicine developed for a heart disease is not working at the same efficiency for Black people because most of the clinical trials are with white middle-aged men. So that's why they are trying to create synthetic patients who are not represented in the real, but then we will talk a lot about it today. But then they are, in fact, generating non-existing profiles because they do not know the data records per se. So the synthetic radiology is one of the most successful areas because they usually are used for the cancer diagnosis and predicting hospital outcomes. So they have been used a lot for optimizing emergency services. As you see, although they are very much computational and the model-based, the applications are very, very social. And another area is the algorithmic fairness testing. So we can really simulate particular demographic groups, which are not, as an example I gave. And you can do it with synthetic CVs. We do know that in employment sector, and especially with this AI supported recruitment systems, some people are more disadvantaged. So they create synthetic CVs with different gender or ethnic profiles or different identities. So they test their recruitment algorithms to produce discriminatory outcomes. So yes, it can help to reduce bias, but it still keeps replicating the existing bias. I strongly recommend you to have a look at why Amazon gave up their own employment AI tool. They tried to correct it for 4 years, if I'm not wrong, and in 2017 they dropped it because they couldn't find a way to make it better because it kept recruiting white male engineers constantly. Despite they tried to create synthetic data, they tried to correct for the bias. And the other one is the machine learning development and testing. So we can really use that for more, let's say, technical or let's say computational reasons, like to balance the class distributions or generate rare events or they stress test our models. And here, most of the fraud detection models are trained through synthetic data. So real fraud events are very rare. So we really try to see what if we have a lot. And it was the case for the disinformation as well, but now we have more than enough real data there. And the last part that I'd like to talk about the usage is the policy and governance. We've already mentioned that, so it is already linked, but the policy simulation, digital twin societies, and open data and research access are the main parts. So the synthetic populations can provide us granular data for the population structure without the personal data exposure. So it is really safe in terms of privacy. So the synthetic population for the policy simulations, like it could be about the tax reform, it could be about a welfare program or a climate policy. And if you just go and check Google Scholar or let's say the international organizations, you will see that most of the policy simulations are going around climate policies nowadays. And the households, again, like they don't focus only on individuals. It's mostly the households that have been synthesized. They want to understand like how the energy subsidies will affect different groups with the Green Deal and the grand transition. So digital driven societies is on a higher level because we are trying to couple communities or cities or societies. So we do it a lot. It could be a country, it could be a city, it could be a neighborhood, but it is highly relying on demographics, economic behavior, and spatial environments. Demographics is sometimes problematic. Spatial environment data is usually the best because the satellite data gives us a lot, but the linkage is super important. And I'll give you an example. where a few cases failed for coupling and the digital twins for Turkey because the residential register system in Turkey is very incompatible with the European one. I'll tell you how it is in Europe, and I think I don't need to explain why it's not gonna match. Like, assume that I'm living in this address. If you go and check this address at the municipality or in general the population register, it is not gonna, like, the data is of course confidential, but you will see how many rooms are there in this house, what are the sizes of the rooms, how many people are living there, and what are the demographics, like how many children are living in this house, how many adults are living in for how long, and you will see it also for the entire street and for the entire neighborhood. But if you recall, like in Turkey, the addresses changes. You can easily send something to somewhere without a postcode. Your apartment name or the label can be more important than the number. So it makes it very difficult for the coupling. So, but there are some cases to do it. But the spatial environment data usually works better if you are working with single households or multiple households, but not super huge apartments. So digital twin population models are really important because it is also used in cases where we don't have sufficient data. I assume that you can really twin two countries, one in Europe, one in Africa. Yes, we don't say that they're exactly the same, but you can find these reference points for checks. And for aging populations, for labor market shifts, we usually use the digital twin population models a lot. And the last one is being used a lot by the statistical offices and SIs. So the high resolution data can be used. This could be mobile phone data, or it could be really population register, or sometimes the health care data as well, but without exposing the individual records. So they give you a synthetic data sets where the distribution fits the real one. And so then you can work on it. So synthetic census microdata has been used a lot, and they are used to study inequalities, but you really don't know who that person is, what that household is, because we will also touch upon what is the difference between individual and group privacy. So to sum it up, I think that is my summary, so you can make it better, I'm sure. But the purpose of synthetic data is either simulation or data augmentation. It's either for policy exploration or the privacy infrastructure. And what you see in the brackets is, I think, where it becomes feasible or more beneficial, because for the data augmentation, we always use machine learning. For privacy infrastructure, it's about the data access, and it helps us to get over with any obstacles around that. For the policy exploration, it's really counterfactual analysis, and the simulation is mostly the agent-based models. And the examples, we've already discussed those. So if we move to the real thing, what is being reconstructed with the synthetic data? Because we said that we try to reconstruct the social reality. So we have the real social system, and we have the observed data, which are not 100% consistent, and we are constructing the synthesis of it, or the synthetic data. So it does depend on model assumptions, training data, and the external statistics. So the synthetic data reflects model consistent worlds, not the real one. I think it's very important, if you're going to remember one thing from this seminar, that should be this, that synthetic data is about model consistency, not about the real reflection. So why evaluation for the matching of synthetic data? Or why do we say that it reflects, but it's not the reality? But how can we evaluate it? It is very hard to evaluate because the true population is mostly unknown. That's the story. That is the purpose why we use the synthetic models. Secondly, we rely on indirect validation, like the distributional validation, predictive validation, and structural validation. So the core problem is the data generation process is like data. It is only partially observable. So we use that. That's what I mean with when we do the validation indirectly, because we use statistical similarity tests and predictive validation. However, none of these metrics guarantee that the synthetic data set represents the real social process that generated the data. So you remember this very basic arrow, like the real social process is how the data is generated, but they are not 100% matching. So going back is very, very difficult. So synthetic data, therefore, can pass the standard validation test because it's statistically consistent, but it might still be producing misleading scientific conclusions. And you can read a lot more on, that's what I already said. I think here what is also important maybe to mention is for the synthetic data, it protects identities. So you might not know who the particular person is, but it might still reveal information about population and groups, which is the question mark around the group privacy. So let's start. So I will talk about two major things, okay? But before that, we really like one is the statistical fidelity and the other one is the disclosure risk. But before that, assume that, like the dilemma, you want to protect individuals from the identification. That's why you go for a synthetic. But at the same time, you want to preserve the statistical structure. So in fact, it's not super easy. So the first thing is the disclosure risk. So no record corresponds directly to a real individual, but privacy risks can still rise because when synthetic data preserve detailed relationship between variables, we can really know more about the membership inference and attribute disclosure. What I mean by the membership inference. So the attackers may infer whether a specific individual was included in the training data. Or let's say the generative models trained on small or highly structured data sets. And you know that especially if you are working with census data or real statistics, they are really highly structured. Models can memorize some rare or very specific observations. Attribute disclosure is a little bit different than that because in this case, the individuals cannot be identified directly, but synthetic data may allow inference about sensitive characteristics of a particular group. For example, preserved correlations between, occupation and income. So it might already reveal some information about the real individuals or a specific demographic groups. So synthetic data sets, therefore, might leak information about population level or community level patterns embedded in the original data. And the second one is not about disclosure, but it's more the statistical fidelity. So the synthetic data sets must produce or reproduce statistical properties of the original data because you're trying to create a twin. So in this case, for the fidelity, we look at three common dimensions. The first one is the distributional fidelity. So it is, in fact, about the similarity of marginal distributions between real and synthetic data. I do assume that you are already familiar with marginal distributions, or at least with the concept. So there are typical, I think I have another slide for that. Yes. So for the data validation, you have the marginal distributions or the distributions. And for the metrics, the metrics, we use it to see whether synthetic data reproduces known statistical properties. And the most common ones that you can use are the KL divergence, Wasserstein distance, or the very basic chi-square tests. So the matching distribution, so you can have a matching distribution between your population and your synthetic data, but it doesn't guarantee the causal structure and the behavioral realism. I think it matters a lot for particularly social and political sciences. So what do I mean by distribution fidelity from the statistical test perspective? Because we need some metrics to be able to understand, to measure the fidelity, distribution fidelity. So what we do is we just compare distributions of variables in the real data set to the synthetic data set, but we cannot capture the interaction between the variables. So we use Kolmogorov-Smirnov or Jensen-Shannon or chi-squares or maximum mean discrepancy because we want to understand the marginal distribution of the values. But where it fails is capturing interaction between variables. So distribution is there, but like, let's say comparing, or let's say intersectionality between distributions is not there for the distribution fidelity. It is very similar for the structural validity, because in this case, we are not interested in if the distributions are similar. We are interested in if the relationships between variables are preserved. So like the income and education correlate in the same way, networks display similar clustering patterns, or the spatial segregation emerge or not. So in many synthetic data sets, they pass the distributional validation because the distributions are there, but it might fail the statistical validation. So what we use the most is the more advanced tests are the logistic detection, parent-child logistic detection for relational data, or relational consistency metrics. So what do they give us? We can test whether a classifier can distinguish synthetic data from real data. What it cannot give us is the relational structure of the original data set. So, and the last part, we talked about the two, and the third one is the task-based validation. So we usually go for the machine learning efficiency, MLE. So we can train a model on synthetic data, and we can evaluate, for the typo, we can evaluate its performance on the real data. So if the model performs similarly, we say that the synthetic data set may preserve predictive information. So what we can do with this, we can test whether the synthetic data set preserves predictive patterns. However, what it cannot do for us is whether to test whether it preserves causal relationships. You see, like it goes really narrow, distribution and the relationships and the causal relationships. So for social science applications, this distinction is really crucial. I mean, if you have any questions, by the way, you can just drop in, like I tend to talk very fast. So if something is not clear, please let me know. So now we are going to talk about the privacy utility trade-off. So utility, when I say utility, I'm talking about how well the model can help us. And we already said that the models, the synthetic populations, and the data generation can pass statistical validation or distributional validation. But at the same time, they might leak information about either individuals or the community. So, but what is the trade-off? Where we should really think about, okay, this, we cannot really use it, or, like there is a problem here or there is not, because the privacy protection generally requires reducing the level of detail preserved in data. And how we usually do it, we add noise. We remove rare cases and we simplify joint distributions. I do hope that you can already imagine a few examples, because like adding a noise, what we do see a lot is when we work with mobile phone data, how it works. I don't know if any of you has ever worked with mobile phone data. Assume that you are working with an XDR, which means when you have your mobile phone, like even if you don't make a call, this one sends a signal to the cell tower. And then we can really count for every cell tower how many signals are there. And then you can link this data to user data or not. But the thing is, when we work with that, the cell towers are everywhere. They are so precise. Sometimes, like the radius of a cell tower is less than 200 meters in some cases. Sometimes it could be kilometers. And in urban areas, as you might guess, the proximity is really there. So all the cell towers are very close to each other. In rural areas, it's way broader. So when we try to simulate the data, what we do is we add noise to the cell tower. Assume that I have a cell tower here at my house. And if I say that, my noise will be just extra one digit, or like reducing one digit from the coordinates. You might say that, it's okay. But one digit in Belgium is about extending the cell tower radius by 2 kilometers. So it really matters how we add this noise, and we cannot do it differently for urban and rural. So that's why there is also a trade-off with the level of detail that we're going to keep in the data for the synthetic population or not. Removing rare cases. So yes, the world is on fire and everything is going crazy. But when you think about epidemic, it happened just 6 years ago. And the earlier one was the Spanish flu. So it really happens so rarely that If you remove the rare cases, it might be an issue. And it's not only about the timeliness of the rareness. Assume that you're interested in radical or extremism. So these are really, really, really tiny proportion of the population, but that is where we are interested in. Even if you're not an ethnographer for the social sciences, the rare cases are usually where we want to know more. And the simplifying joint distributions is, it sounds very statistical, but it does have a lot of impact also on us, because when simplifying a joint distribution might not, let's say, jeopardize your research question or your data, but it might reduce the data set's analytical validity. So the synthetic data approach, how can I say it? The synthetic data assumes that real data will be useful precisely when the disclosure risk is not there, but which is not the case. So it is really like an utopia. So what is the implication then for the synthetic data evaluation? When you evaluate, we need to evaluate them simultaneously. We talked about disclosure risk. We talked about statistical fidelity, structural validity, and task-specific performance. But you cannot have one single metric that's going to capture all these aspects. So it's very important that it shouldn't be considered inherently like privacy preserving or analytically reliable just because it's synthetic. It is very much model dependent. I think I'm still on time. I'm almost finishing. Please give me a sign if I talk too much. So take home messages from this. Synthetic data do not eliminate privacy constraints or data limitations. So it's not better data. They do transform the data or the privacy constraints or the limitations into a design problem. So we need the balancing disclosure protection with preservation of meaningful statistical structure, because data, machine learning, or text mining, they all rely on how to keep the statistical structure stable. But statistical structures are not reflecting the social reality all the time. And then we can talk a little bit about the limits of synthetic data generation. If you want to know more about those, I have the references, but you can also drop me an email later. But there are very concrete structural assumptions about the data. Like if you use SMOT for the data generation, the assumption is that the interpolation between observed points corresponds to valid observations in real population. But this is really questionable in social sciences. Assume that attitudes between ideological groups, it may not be continuous. Or when you think about decision to migrate, it is not linear, definitely. Or when you think about the social categories, they can be more discrete in the real world rather than continuous. So in short, interpolation between observed points and the observation is a very strong assumption, and we usually fail to meet that assumption. If you're working with Gaussian cupola models, then the dependency structures remain stable across data sets. It's really like using regression, like simple regression models to model what's going on in the society, because you assume that the errors are IID and everything is under control, which is not the case. If you are using GAN-based generators, you need large data. You need temporally large, granularly large. So the training data set should be really in very good condition. So, which is not the case. It might be the case for health, it works really well. For mobile data, it also works very well. But if you're working with survey data or official statistics, it's really problematic. And for the causal models, of course, prior assumptions about the relationship between the variables there. And this can be really an issue. For economists, it's easier because they do assume that if you know about the money, you know about everything. But we do know that sometimes the direction of the causality, or not the causality relationship, is bidirectional. So things are like, we don't know if people are more religious, if more religious people are more conservative, or more conservative people are more religious, because it happens at the same time. So the failed assumptions, so if you fail assumptions, the synthetic data just reproduces the systematic bias or inaccurate dependencies. So it's very important to know. I don't mean to say that we shouldn't use synthetic data. We do. It's just about to acknowledge where we fail, what we cannot say with it or where it falls short. So about this fidelity and validity, I would like to talk a bit more on that, because the distribution similarity correlation structures and the marginal frequencies is very important, because fidelity is about how closely your synthetic data matches statistical properties of the original data set. But the utility is more about the models, like whether your models trained on synthetic data perform similarly to those who were trained on the real data. So the classification accuracy, regression performance, or policy simulation outputs. But what to remember here is high fidelity doesn't bring structural validity. So you can still reproduce statistical patterns, but you might be distorting causal relationships. Then, yeah, your data might look realistic. I mean, I would put it in quotation marks, but it can really represent a different underlying system rather than the social reality. Then, to sum up, when synthetic data become an analytical mirage, first of all, again, bias. Bias amplification is there, and the model collapse and recursive artifacts are very important. The bias amplification, yes, it inherits biases from training data, and especially if your original data is censored or you have particular underrepresented groups that you don't have enough information, it just either reproduces or amplifies this distortion. And the model collapse is about when you train your model on synthetic data generated from previous models, information diversity decreases. So that is the inbreeding that we meant. So this has been described as model collapse, because the synthetic data progressively distort the real distribution. And the synthetic trust, I find this concept very interesting, because it is very similar to this belief about, big data is better than traditional data assumption. So the large synthetic data sets can create illusion of empirical evidence. So the evidence is there, it is empirical, but we really need to, we may develop unwarranted confidence in models and train on artificial data, and they might really fail to represent what's really happening. So, but what are the implications of that? Like, first of all, model-based reconstructions are I wouldn't say they are future, but they're very important, because it's getting costlier and it is very difficult to get more data. So we rely on synthetic data. And I do believe that in the coming years, the synthetic data generation and then the models will get better and better, especially with incomplete data. But remember, we reconstruct the models, we do not reconstruct the observations. So most of the social systems are only partially observable, as we already said. So we use surveys, administrative data sets, we use digital traces or census, aggregate level census mostly, but each source captures only a projection of the system. So in this case, when we talk about inference about the latent distribution, not the population itself, synthetic data can reproduce marginal distributions and joint distributions of selected variables. Of course, again, it depends on which method you're going to use. And then the correlation structures between attributes. But the true underlying social process remains unobserved. So you cannot simulate, let's put it so, we can simulate behavior, but they will not be observed behavior simulations. So they will be predicted behaviors. So the implication, of course, is that the synthetic data do not solve the partial observability. So it's not an alternative for imputation. It just transforms it into a modeling problem. So I really like this cartoon, by the way. Synthetic data can be extremely valuable for privacy-preserving data sharing, simulation initialization. And privacy preserving data sharing, do not consider it only for, oh, we can have access to private data. It is also linked to privately owned data, because we do know that most of the big data are owned by private companies and they usually sell them or they don't allow access. But synthetic populations are very useful in that sense. The simulation initialization, scenario explorations, but they should be treated as model-based reconstructions of reality. I know I repeated that a lot, but that is of its significance, not the empirical observations. So if you're interested, then these are the sources that I used. And I really like for this one, but I also have an earlier, these are more recent ones. I can also send you very early studies as well. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
much,
much hocam.
hocam.
Sorry hocam. Go on.
Oh, no, Shukri, please go on. So,
Hocam, it was really inspiring, especially after listening 2 weeks of LLM-based synthetic data generation works. This is so much structured, we can say. Now, please, you can send your questions and we can ask Tuba Hoca them. I can begin, hocam, with my question,
Sure.
as in the tradition of Mary Hoca. Hocam, we were discussing LLM-based synthetic data generation in the last weeks. As I said, it's much more random compared to these traditional synthetic data generation approaches. Do you think any good can come out of LLM-based synthetic data generation?
You know, it's a very difficult question, right? So, partially, yes. I will give you the short answer first, because LLMs are today's reality. Okay, so, and they will be also part of how we are going to do that. And I think in the chat, there is another question about this LLMs and about the surveys. I have to say that I don't know if it's the risk, but this is very personal. I don't have like empirical evidence yet about that, but we do know that LLMs, the peak that we're expecting is not happening. Okay, so we had with the OpenAI the first one, we had the second one, but we are waiting for the third one. And I do believe that the major challenge here is that most of the earlier ones, the very early LLM models, are trained on highly valuable human-generated data. I don't know if you heard about several authors like sued OpenAI, including Margaret Atwood and her colleagues, because they said, this is our intellectual and literary property, and you trained it. So they worked very, very well. But now, like, I think more than half of the assignments that are submitted by my students are either AI generated or supported by LLM fed outputs. Even the emails that you get from people, if you go and check LinkedIn, everybody puts, I'm thrilled with rockets and whatever, it's LLM again, because they are all Gen AI things. So it is everywhere. It's getting more common, and I think it's good. It helps us to save time, whatever, but we have to remember that they're feeding in the training system. So if you are going to rely on what has been produced, I have to say that I guess training data is getting dirty. However, if we can find ways to get over it, I think, yes, it's going to help. But when we talk about numbers, it's a different issue. So we do know that, like, when we talk about the global north, the data is better. But even the data for Europe and the Americas are not compatible. And if you think about LLM and in general how things are happening, it's China and the States, and because they don't have GDPR, and that's where they use all type of data for, let's say, training their data sets. So in fact, when you ask a question, you are getting an answer based on US or China trained data. So I think there will be some segregations, but I don't think that it will be, I mean, the end of the world, or no, we cannot really rely on them. I think the right way is to know where to question. So, but to be good, it really depends, because like for the purposes, like in the classical synthetic data, maybe I can summarize it like that. So it is more based on the statistical properties, because that's what I talked a lot today. But in the LLM, they are creating personas, they are creating narratives, they are not really talking about distributions. So the text corpora is there. So I guess it's very, very tricky, and I guess the heuristic validation is more difficult. So I would say that it is more difficult, but it is there, and it will be the case, because you can ask an LLM to say that, oh, write this email like Charles Dickens, and they do. I don't know if it answers, but it's not a very easy question. So in general, I would rather say that it constructs statistical populations if we are going to use it for that. But when we talk about this cultural narratives or the populations, I think we have to be super, super cautious. And okay.
Hocam, I'm going to read other questions. Abhishek Rao asks, if the structural assumptions in the generation model aren't correct, how do we check whether the synthetic data is introducing bias?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because normally we do not know the true population distribution. So the validation rely on the robustness across multiple tests and data sources. So it's a very fundamentally epistemic question, but I would rather say that how we do is, for the sensitivity analysis particularly, we generate multiple synthetic data sets, and we have multiple modeling assumptions. So because it's model dependent rather than data driven, so we try to have different models and different dependencies, but in short, it is really just the robustness across different tests. So we don't really have like a structural assumption, because we do not know the true population distribution. So the grassroots data is not there. I don't know if it answers the question.
Ilayda has a question, hocam, about LLMs again. She says, thank you for your presentation, very insightful. My question is, in consumer intelligence, companies use LLMs to generate personas to replace traditional surveys due to feasibility and cost. I've seen segments like premium young adult white-collar TikTok girl has Dyson and in-home espresso coffee machine used in real FMCG decisions. After generating, brand managers treat them as proxies for real populations. These personas aren't discovered. They are constructed from training data biases, then reified into pricing and targeting decisions affecting people never actually observed. Is this the epistemic mirage your work cautions against? And does the feedback loop, synthetic archetypes shaping real markets, which then reinforce these archetypes, make it structurally irreversible?
Okay. So as a statistician who is still working with traditional surveys, we are questioning the survey validity a lot. And especially, I'm super skeptical about online surveys. So we are dropping it, like literally. We really go back to face-to-face surveys as much as we can, because like LLMs you can have AI agents that complete based on a sample that you define, because you can say that I want a sample 50% gender representation and everything. But instead of talking about that, and I find it very, very dangerous, I would like to talk a bit more about this market approach that you refer to, because we are talking about most of the companies. I think the main, I wouldn't call it a risk, but rather a danger, is that when synthetic personas guide this kind of real economic decisions, I think we are going to lose, or the boundary between the real and the synthetic will collapse, because it becomes that the models are not analyzing the market, they are building the market. So I think that is because it is not only in the market, we're going to see it also in politics as well. And honestly, what has happened with Cambridge Analytica and the first Trump election, it was exactly that, because they used recommendation systems and customer segmentation to target particularly undecided voters, and they really worked towards them. So those people were not all Trump supporters, but they, you know, like all these the marketing and advertising strategies work. So I guess it is, I think these LLM generated personas, because that's how they do, are extremely prone to this mirage part that I discussed. I think that is the very problematic one. So I think traditional simulation still beats that. They will definitely beat that. So, but I do believe that they, like, it becomes the question in your, I mean, the question that your question gives birth is in fact the intention. So for what purpose? If you're talking about policymakers, do they really want to know who thinks in what way, how they will vote, or do they want to manipulate people to buy, to vote, to whatever? So I guess it doesn't have a very, let's say, easy answer. I know it's not very satisfying, but the synthetic personas may not be wrong, but we should ask what kind of knowledge claim do they support? So behind it, I don't know if it roughly answers your question, because it's an hour's talk, I would say.
Tuba, may I ask you a follow-up question?
Of course.
Some people are trying to simulate respondents and the population, and there is also a growing, I don't know if it is growing significantly, but a number of words that try to simulate the researcher, especially the qualitative researchers.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, so there are some companies that are simulating like qualitative researchers to conduct automated interviews, focus groups, and also the reporting. And on the other hand, there are like, maybe you remember, there was a petition by a qualitative social scientists to go against the use of AI and agents to replace qualitative researchers. So I don't know what, or if you have a like thought about that, and I really would like to hear what you think. It's a very specific question, but I mean,
I don't know. It's not a lot. I mean, it's super interesting. I just like, these are very difficult questions, and I'll try to tell you just my perspective on that. And I think there is one question in the chat linked to that, because your question very much is about also the responsibility and the positionality. Because honestly, I strongly believe that social scientists should use AI, Gen AI, and we should be part of the developments. I mean, but how, to what extent, in which context is a different story, because I do not believe that it is going to replace social scientists. I don't believe that, because again, like, assume that I mean, if you're having a study in the States and Gen AI, like an agent might be very useful, or if you are having an interview with millionaires or, I don't know, C-level people, it might maybe work. But the contribution of the qualitative work in general is what you cannot find in data, like what you cannot really quantify. And we have to remember that even LLMs are working, like, yes, they are working with text, but they're quantifying text. So they're working with the word distances, they're working with the count. So it's another quantified version. So what I do believe is that because the initial start of your question is the chatbots, because the customer services, they started to have this agent ask a question, you answer, so they try to find you and they keep this information and they analyze it. But interview is a different thing, because even if you get 5 questions, the digging is different. And we do know that the bias that we have discussed a lot in the Gen AI is very difficult to overcome. And like when it was, I'm using OpenAI, Gemini, and all of them, but when it was a trend, I asked OpenAI, ChatGPT, I said, oh, can you describe me what type of a person I am? It thought that I'm a white male computer scientist. Because I mean, I keep, of course, the memory off, and I don't give any information, but still, because I'm using it for code debugging a lot. So I think they might try, but I don't believe that they're going to replace. And there was a very recent paper on Nature about why we should stop doing online surveys as well. But does it mean that it is not going to be used? No, I think it can really be assistant to field work, because it is about translation, it's about like transcribing and everything. But I don't believe that they will replace, or they should replace. Yet I see them, there are ways to integrate them, but how to do it is again like the discussion, because I do believe that most of these biases, the challenges that we are talking about, is due to this missing link between the social scientists and the people who are developing those things. Because I'm so glad that in your program you also teach social theory to the candidates, because we do have, I mean, I get a lot of companies reaching out. They say, oh, we have a lot of data. What can we do with it? So they do not have the question. And for a lot of people, we had just a small anecdote, but I think it matters a lot. We had a survey in the UK with with researchers and the computer scientists and data scientists who are working in genomics and genetics. And we asked them the units of analysis. It's very basic, right? They are working with genes and real clinical data, and only 10% refer to humans. They were talking about RNAs, they're talking about code, they're talking about like a laboratory sample. So they don't really think that, I'm not talking about the scientists who are dealing with people. So these people are sitting in front of the computer, do all the AI work behind, and they really think that what they are dealing with is not humane. So I think if you find a way to link, it might work, but I don't see it as a kind of replacement. AI can replace developers. And that is the reason, I don't know if you do follow, there are some challenges for the recent graduates in computer science and AI people, because they need more senior profiles who can make decisions. I know it's not a direct answer. I know we can talk later, but I think it is going to happen. Maybe the last thing I should say, I think it's going to happen. They will try, but I don't think that it is going to work.
Hocam, we have 8 more questions.
Oof,
If
okay.
you have time, I can
Yes,
continue,
yes, I can. Yes, I have still some time. Yeah.
or we can pick some questions.
Whatever you prefer. I mean, I also see the questions. Maybe I can go through them and see if I can say at least a few
Please
words
hocam. Yeah.
about all. Is it okay?
Please hocam.
Definitely, that would be nice.
Okay. Oh, thanks a lot. So for the nice words. And I there is one question from Emre Güzeldal. I see that she was framing perception generator, where it's something analogous happens with this in policy context when policymakers treat a synthetic population as a legitimate representation of real people. Does the real population gradually align with and resemble? Yeah, I think this is linked to what we have said. It might happen. It might happen, but in general, like the health policy makers, they use synthetic populations way more, and it did really work when we were talking about, let's say, the community level acts. So we could anticipate, like they create simulations. I mean, I told you that today is a very large strike in Belgium, and they did simulations to see how many people will be on the streets, how many people will use the trains, because they canceled even the trains, but there should be some vital ones. So they did some calculations. I think for the aggregate level, or let's say that kind of community political like acts or mobility actions, I guess it is easier. But if you are really referring to, let's say, targeted policies, I think it's very problematic. That happens a lot. Like they tried to do it in Belgium. They created a synthetic population of homeless, undocumented people. And because we don't have the data on that. And when they consulted it with the NGOs who are working with undocumented people and the homeless people, they said it is completely wrong, because the simulated data had almost no women. But more than 15% of the homeless were women. So I guess it feeds, you're right, that they shouldn't get it as a legitimate representation, but I think they don't. However, it doesn't mean that they are trying to align what they want. So, or they can use it for the purposes. So the catastrophic validity, I hope not. I'm not a techno pessimist. I said it, I'm a cautious optimist. So I think it is something that we can overcome, but even AI underestimates people. People are they are the agents of change, like, so I think we can really surprise them. And if it's okay, I will move to the other one about the epistemic feedback loop where models increase rather than reality. Oh, this is a very good question and a very difficult one. I think the breaking point is the human assessors. So the moments that we get rid of the human assessors and annotators, I think we are really in trouble, because they are going to reflect themselves. But the challenge is again that because you don't have the true population distribution, you don't have the population itself, it is a problem. So I think it is about the activists, it's about the civil society, it's about the computational social scientists who can do. I don't think that it's possible to say this is the breaking point, because AI can learn faster than us. But I think it is more about like relying on qualitative data as well. I don't know if you do know, but for instance, for the content check of the social media, it is still the real people in South Asia sitting in their, I don't know, 3 square meter rooms looking at videos or whatever. So they are human assessed, and I think human assessors will still be there. And I think I missed a question. Yes, this one. Synthetic data is effectively a design problem. Where do you personally draw the red line? I think it's also linked to the previous one. At what point does the transformation of data stop being a useful analytical tool and start becoming a form of synthetic misinformation? I think this is a little bit of a chicken egg problem in a way that what is the purpose? Are you trying to understand how the population will react, or are you synthesizing population to manipulate how you want them to react? So in that sense, I do still believe that they want to see what's going to happen for real. So for instance, they want to understand who's going to vote for them. They want to understand who will sign a petition, who will go and join the army. So, but in general, no, it's not addressed, by the way, but I guess I wouldn't call it a scientific misinformation. I really call it self-fulfilling prophecy, because we do know that you can lie with data even if you don't have a synthetic population. A simple example, sorry, I'm giving a lot of examples from Belgium, but that's the context that I'm the most familiar with. Like here, the right-wing party, one of the ministers, he had a website, and the website is based entirely on official data. It is about it's called the migration reality or migrant reality. And in Belgium, the asylum application acceptance rate is 51%. Okay. And this is the official statistics. And the website has multiple pages about it, talking, you see, half of the asylum seekers are liars. So it speculates on the rejected 50% and saying that they are rejected because of this, because of that. So you can lie with data. So synthetic populations can make it faster, but I don't think that it is any worse than lying with the traditional data. And is there anyone? Yes, another question. Whether synthetic data brings certain limitations in terms of methodology or analysis, for instance, would it be reliable to use Bayesian setting? Very good question, and I can. I don't have the answer. I'll start with that, and it's a question that I'm trying to find the answer, because currently what we are doing, we are working on a survey, a traditional survey, face-to-face survey in 6 countries, and we are working with undeclared workers. So, okay, people who do not declare their work or underdeclare. So these are people working, you can call them illegally, or you can say that without thing. And it happens a lot in Turkey as well. Like people get minimum wage, but in fact they work more or they get more money. So the survey will be done in person. We'll have a lot of qualitative data, and it's very costly, and we have a lot of experiments in that. And we are going to, so we are designing the experiment in a way that we can have a tuning protocol for the countries and some cities, not so level, so that we can create synthetic data for the countries that we do not have the survey. And we are working with also, because we are trying to simulate attitudes, if we can, we are going to work with the other data. So the thing is, we already, let's say, identified a few limitations. The first thing is that it is very similar with the, let's say, a predictive model, a machine learning model. It is as strong as your data. If the data is that you're using is good, it is good. If it's not good, synthetic data will not help you. And the second part, for the analysis part, I think when you enter the stage for the analysis, especially in the Bayesian settings, I think your assumptions quadruple, because you already have the setting assumptions, then you already have other assumptions. So I do think that it is really worth to go back and maybe double check a few assumptions of your data and the validity of data. But I think it's not going to be, let's say, it's not going to be worse than having a Bayesian model with missing data, because there you also assume a lot of things. And let me see. Is there a standardized way to quantify the relationship between privacy protection and article loss? Yes, there are a few ways. There are two very good articles. Mehmet, if you drop me an email, I can send you that. It explains it clearly. Not everybody agrees on that, but there are ways to do it. And one question on the CDR datasets. What do you think about the impact of recent advances? Do you think it's enough with generate realistic CDR datasets? I think it is more feasible to create XDR datasets. I don't know if you know the difference between CDR and XDR. CDR is the call data record, so you only get the signal if I make a call. But XDR is as long as my phone is connected to internet, you have the XDR. So XDR is more continuous. So yeah, I think it's easier to do that. And with the call, it's more tricky, because now people do not use regular lines. A lot of people call from WhatsApp, you call from Signal. So it is already biased data on its own. So I think less and less people are relying on CDR. So XDR works. So yes, we can use it, and we can do it realistically only if we are interested in aggregate level things. So it can help us, like we can really see how the proportionally how many people move from one place to other one, where they gather, or what are the major routes, or let's say corridors that have been used. I think we can use it, and CDR is one of the most promising areas. Also the satellite data, because these are the best data with the least missing data. But if you are talking about, because when you have XDR, it is only the device itself. When you say CDR, you already defer the linkage to the user, and the user data is very problematic. You can have 3 cards registered to your name, but one could be with your mom, the other one could be with your child, and you can have the third, and it's impossible to identify those. So the user data is more problematic, but the XDR, it is very, very promising. And if synthetic data keeps the same distribution but not the relationships between the variables, I wouldn't. But it is about the research question that you have. If your research question is about to see, like when we talk about the impact of a lockdown, you can really rely on the model. But if you are interested in who is not going to obey the lockdown, then your model will not help you. So I think it is about how generic your question or how broad your question is. Yeah, I think we answered all. Have I missed any?
You answered all, hocam, I
Perfect.
think.
But I mean, if you have anything, if you can always drop me an email.
Bravo, hocam.
It's been very challenging for me, very difficult questions. I have to study harder.
Yeah, thank you very much. I mean, thank you all of our students and all of the audience for excellent comments and questions. Do we have any other questions, comments? Maybe otherwise we can thank Tuba once again for everything and for this wonderful, excellent presentation. And yeah,
Like, Ajam, can I make a little? I mean, it's not a promotion, but an announcement because you already
please.
mentioned about the PhD. So, just to clarify, because I also get some questions from students, like the PhD positions at least at my institute are twofold. Okay, the first one is we write a project, we get the funding, then we seek up students. So it's like a job vacancy, and it is on the website. We publish it everywhere. So we are waiting for the results. Hopefully, if it's gonna happen. I will have because we applied for Marie Curie doctoral network. Let's see what's gonna happen. Okay, so we will have. But the second part is like our national agency, like TUBITAC, like the Belgian version of it. There are individual scholarships that you can apply, but it is every year and the deadline is fixed. It's always the 1st of March. So for the next year, like if you are the first year student, you can apply next year already because it takes almost a year. So the deadline is in March and you can start in October or November. So if you're interested in, CSS, of course, but you can always reach out to me. If I'm not the right person, I can help you to find the right supervisor, not only in my institute, but also others. And if I know there are a few postdocs around as well, so we have more postdoc positions. So you can check. I usually share things. I'm not a big social media user, but I put them on LinkedIn. I share it with the computational social science mail list. So there are options, but if you have concrete ideas, you can always reach out to me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This is really important.